I smoothed down my simple white dress, taking a deep breath as Lucas and I stood outside the courthouse. This was it, our big day. No frills, no fuss, just us and our love. I squeezed Lucas's hand, feeling a flutter of excitement in my chest. Ready, Mrs. Soon-to-be Prescott? Lucas grinned, his blue eyes twinkling. I nodded, unable to contain my smile. More than ready, Mr. Soon-to-be Emma's husband. As we climbed the courthouse steps, a shrill voice cut through our bubble of happiness. Lucas, Emma, stop right there. I turned to see Lucas's mother, Vivian, marching towards us, her face pinched with disapproval. His father, Richard, trailed behind her, looking equally displeased. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Lucas asked, confusion evident in his voice. Vivian's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. Stopping this travesty, of course. A courthouse wedding? Really, Lucas? I thought we raised you better than this. I felt my cheeks flush with anger. Mrs. Prescott, with all due respect, this is our decision. We want a simple ceremony. Richard stepped forward, his voice dripping with disdain. Simple? More like cheap. Is this the kind of life you want for our son, Emma? Lucas wrapped his arm around my waist protectively. Dad, that's enough. Emma and I agreed on this together. We'd rather spend our money on our future, not one day. Vivian let out a dramatic sigh. Oh, Lucas, can't you see what she's doing? She's trapping you with this rushed wedding. I bet she's already pregnant with another man's child. The accusation hit me like a slap in the face. What? How dare you? I sputtered, too shocked to form a coherent response. Lucas's grip on me tightened. Mom, that's ridiculous. Emma would never... Open your eyes, son, Richard interrupted. Why else would she insist on such a hasty, cheap wedding? She's hiding something. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I can't believe you'd think that of me. Lucas and I love each other. We just want to start our life together without going into debt for a fancy wedding. Vivian sniffed. Love, please. You've known each other for what, a year? That's hardly enough time. It's been 2 years, Mom, Lucas corrected, his voice tight with frustration. I took a deep breath, trying to salvage the situation. Look, I understand you're upset. Why don't we compromise? We can have a small celebration after the courthouse ceremony. You can even help plan it if you'd like. Vivian's eyes lit up for a moment before narrowing again. A small celebration? That's hardly befitting the Prescott name. No, this won't do at all. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, clearly exasperated. Mom, Dad, please, this is supposed to be a happy day for Emma and me. Can't you just support us? Richard shook his head. Support you throwing your life away? I think not. Emma's clearly not good enough for this family if she can't even give you a proper wedding. I felt my heart sink. How had our perfect day turned into this nightmare? I looked up at Lucas, seeing the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between his love for me and his desire to please his parents. Maybe, Lucas started, his voice hesitant. Maybe we should reconsider the courthouse wedding. I stepped back, hurt and disbelief washing over me. Lucas, you can't be serious? This is what we wanted. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I know, but maybe my parents have a point. We should at least think about it. As I stood there, caught between the man I loved and his judgmental parents, I realized our simple wedding day had just become the beginning of a much larger battle. One that would test not just our love, but our very identities and values. I paced our small living room, my mind racing. The courthouse wedding fiasco was still fresh, and Lucas sat on the couch, his head in his hands. We needed a solution, and fast. Lucas, I said, stopping in front of him, we need to address your parents' accusations. I can't believe they think I'm pregnant with someone else's child. He looked up, his eyes weary. I know, Emma. It's ridiculous, but you know how they are. I took a deep breath. I have an idea. What if we compromise? We'll have a small, tasteful wedding celebration. Nothing too extravagant, but enough to show them we're serious. Lucas perked up. That might actually work, but will it be enough for them? We can invite them to the photo shoot, I suggested. Make them feel involved. Maybe if they see us together happy, they'll come around. He nodded slowly. It's worth a shot. I'll give them a call. I listened as Lucas spoke to his mother, my stomach churning with each word. When he hung up, his face was grim. Well? I asked, dreading the answer. They're coming over? Now. He ran a hand through his hair. They want to discuss our plans. An hour later, we sat across from Vivian and Richard in our tiny dining room. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "So," Vivian began, her voice syrupy sweet, "you've reconsidered the courthouse wedding. How sensible of you." I forced a smile. "Yes, we thought a small celebration would be nice. We'd love for you to be part of the planning process." Richard scoffed. "Planning process? For what? A backyard barbecue?" Lucas tensed beside me. "Dad, please, we're trying here." I reached for Lucas's hand, squeezing it gently. "We were thinking of a nice restaurant, actually. Something intimate but elegant." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Intimate? You mean small, cheap. Really, Emma, is this how you show your love for our son?" "Mom," Lucas warned, but she waved him off. "No, Lucas, I won't stand by and watch you throw away your future on this." She gestured at me dismissively. I felt my cheeks burn. "Mrs. Prescott, I love your son. Our wedding doesn't define that love." Richard leaned forward, his voice low. "No, but it does define your character, and right now, all I see is a gold digger trying to trap my son." "That's enough!" Lucas slammed his hand on the table, making us all jump. "Emma is my fiancée, and I won't sit here and listen to you insult her." A tense silence fell over the room. I took a deep breath, trying to salvage the situation. "Look, we want you to be part of this. Why don't you come to the photo shoot? You can see for yourself how happy we are." Vivian let out a harsh laugh. "A photo shoot? Let me guess, in the park with some amateur photographer friend of yours?" I bit my lip, fighting back tears. We haven't decided on the details yet." Richard stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. Lucas, can't you see what she's doing to you? She's turning you against your own family." Lucas rose to meet his father's gaze. "No, Dad, you're doing that all on your own." As Richard and Vivian stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I collapsed into Lucas's arms, finally letting the tears fall. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he whispered, stroking my hair. "I never thought they'd react like this." I pulled back, wiping my eyes. "Lucas, maybe we should just elope. This is tearing your family apart." He cupped my face in his hands. "No, we'll figure this out. I promise." As we stood there, holding each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles. The small wedding we'd envisioned seemed to be slipping further and further away, and I wondered if our relationship could withstand the storm that was brewing. I nervously smoothed my skirt as Lucas and I sat in my parents' cozy living room. The familiar scent of Mom's lavender candles usually calmed me, but today, nothing could ease the knot in my stomach. "Honey, are you sure about this courthouse wedding?" Mom asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "It seems so impersonal." Dad leaned forward, his kind eyes meeting mine. "We support you, Pumpkin, but is this really what you want?" I glanced at Lucas, who squeezed my hand reassuringly. "We thought it was," I began, "but after everything with Lucas's parents—" "They were horrible to Emma," Lucas interjected, his voice tight with anger. "Accused her of being pregnant with another man's child, called her a gold digger." Mom gasped. "They didn't." I nodded, fighting back tears. "They did. We tried to compromise with a small celebration, but they shot that down too." Dad's face darkened. "That's unacceptable. No one treats my daughter that way." "We know, Dad," I said quickly, not wanting to escalate the situation further. "That's why we're here. We need advice." Mom reached out, patting my knee. "Well, sweetie, I understand wanting to keep things simple, but a small ceremony doesn't have to mean a courthouse." Lucas perked up. "What do you mean?" "Why not have an intimate wedding here?" Mom suggested. "We could set up the backyard, invite close family and friends. It would be personal and meaningful." I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. "That actually sounds perfect." Dad nodded approvingly. "And it wouldn't break the bank. Win-win." Lucas and I exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between us. Finally, he smiled. "I think we've found our solution." As we ironed out the details, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. This was it, the perfect compromise. But our newfound peace was short-lived. Later that evening, as Lucas and I cuddled on the couch, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face immediately clouding over. "What is it?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. He handed me the phone, and I read the text from his mother. "We've booked the Grand Plaza Hotel for your wedding. No need to thank us. It's the least we can do to salvage this situation." I felt the blood drain from my face. "They didn't." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "They did. God, I can't believe them." I stood up, pacing the room. "This is too much, Lucas. They're completely disregarding our wishes. He nodded, his jaw clenched. I know. I'll call them right now and put an end to this. I listened as Lucas dialed, my heart racing. But as soon as his mother answered, I knew we were in trouble. Mom, you can't just book a venue without consulting us, Lucas said, his voice strained. I could hear Vivian's shrill voice through the phone. Of course we can, darling. The Grand Plaza is perfect for a Prescott wedding. You'll thank us later. But we don't want. Now. Vivian interrupted. We've already put down a non-refundable deposit. It would be such a shame to waste it. I watched as Lucas's resolve crumbled. Well, think about it, Mom. As he hung up, I felt my world tilting on its axis. Lucas, please tell me we're not considering this. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Emma, they've already paid. Maybe we should just go along with it, to keep the peace. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt washing over me. Keep the peace? Lucas, they're steamrolling us. This isn't what we wanted. I know, but no buts. I cut him off, anger rising in my chest. This is our wedding, not theirs. We need to stand our ground. Lucas stood, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Emma, please, let's just sleep on it, okay? As I looked at him, torn between love and frustration, I realized we were at a crossroads. Our simple wedding dream was slipping away, and with it, possibly our relationship. I had to decide, stand firm and risk alienating Lucas's family, or give in and lose a piece of myself in the process. The choice loomed before me, as daunting as the Grand Plaza Hotel itself. I stood in the opulent lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, feeling like a fish out of water. The crystal chandeliers and marble floors screamed excess, everything Lucas and I had wanted to avoid. Yet here we were, about to tour the venue his parents had so generously gifted us. Isn't it marvelous, darling? Vivian's voice dripped with satisfaction as she swept into the lobby, Richard close behind. I forced a smile. It's certainly grand. Lucas squeezed my hand, a silent plea for patience. Mom, Dad, we appreciate the gesture, but... Now, Richard cut in. Let's see the ballroom before we discuss anything. As we followed the event coordinator, a perky blonde named Tiffany, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. Each step deeper into the hotel felt like another nail in the coffin of our simple wedding dreams. The ballroom was a spectacle of gilt and grandeur. Tiffany's voice faded into background noise as she rattled off seating capacities and catering options. All I could focus on was the growing pit in my stomach. Emma? Lucas's voice snapped me back to reality. What do you think? I looked around, seeing the expectant faces of Lucas, his parents, and Tiffany. The weight of their gazes pressed down on me, suffocating. I need some air, I managed to choke out before fleeing the ballroom. I found myself in a secluded garden, gulping in deep breaths of fresh air. The sound of footsteps made me turn, expecting Lucas. Instead, I found myself face to face with Richard. Running away won't solve anything, you know, he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. I bristled. I'm not running away, I'm just overwhelmed. He nodded, looking thoughtful. This isn't what you wanted. The unexpected empathy caught me off guard. No, it's not. Lucas and I wanted something small, intimate. Like your relationship with my son. Richard's eyes narrowed. Tell me, Emma, how well do you really know Lucas? I frowned. What do you mean? We've been together for 2 years. Richard pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before handing it to me. Does this look familiar? My heart dropped as I stared at the image. It was Lucas, arm around a stunning redhead, both laughing at some unseen joke. The timestamp showed it was taken just last week. I don't understand, I stammered, my mind reeling. Richard's voice was cold. That's Melissa, Lucas's ex. They've been meeting up quite frequently, it seems. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. No, there must be some explanation. Lucas wouldn't what? Lie to you? Keep secrets? Richard scoffed. Wake up, Emma. You barely know my son. As if on cue, Lucas's voice called out, Emma, where are you? I handed the phone back to Richard, my hands shaking. I need to go. Think about what I've said, Richard warned as I walked away, and about whether you really want to tie yourself to this family. I found Lucas near the entrance to the garden, concern etched on his face. There you are. Are you okay? I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for any sign of deception. Lucas, who's Melissa? His face paled. What? How do you? So it's true, I whispered, feeling my world crumble around me. Lucas reached for me, but I stepped back. Emma, please, it's not what you think. Let me explain. But I was already moving, pushing past him and Vivian, who had just appeared looking confused. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just knew I had to get out of there. As I burst out of the hotel into the busy street, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could confront Lucas, demand answers, and potentially salvage our relationship. Or I could walk away, protect my heart, and say goodbye to the future we'd planned. The choice loomed before me, as daunting as the Grand Plaza itself. With tears blurring my vision and Lucas's calls fading behind me, I took a deep breath and made my decision. I stood in the bridal boutique, surrounded by a sea of white tulle and satin. Vivian's voice grated on my nerves as she flitted from dress to dress, each more extravagant than the last. "Oh, Emma, darling, you simply must try this one." She thrust a monstrosity of beads and ruffles at me. I forced a smile. "It's something, Mrs. Prescott, but I was thinking of something simpler." Vivian's face fell. "Simple? But dear, this is your big day. You want to look like a princess, don't you?" Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucas. "How's it going? Mom behaving?" I sighed, typing back, "Define behaving." "Emma?" My mother's gentle voice cut through my thoughts. "Are you okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The truth was, I was far from okay. Ever since the Grand Plaza incident and the revelation about Melissa, things had been strained between Lucas and me. We'd talked it out. Apparently Melissa was just an old friend he'd run into. But doubt still gnawed at me. "Well, if you won't try on that lovely gown, at least consider this one," Vivian insisted, presenting another over-the-top dress. I felt my patience snap. "Mrs. Prescott, I appreciate your input, but this is my wedding. I'll choose my own dress." The boutique fell silent. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "I'm only trying to help, dear. After all, we want you to look your best. God knows you need all the help you can get." "Mom," Lucas's sister, Sarah, gasped. But Vivian wasn't done. "Really, Emma, I don't understand why you're being so difficult. We're giving you a dream wedding. The least you could do is show some gratitude." I felt tears pricking my eyes. Gratitude? For what? For completely disregarding our wishes? For insulting me at every turn? Now, my mother tried to intervene, but I was on a roll. "You've criticized every decision we've made. You've questioned my character, my intentions, even my love for Lucas. And now you're trying to force me into a dress I hate for a wedding I never wanted." The boutique was dead silent. Vivian's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Well, I never. If this is how you truly feel, perhaps you're not the right person for my son after all." "That's enough." A new voice cut through the tension. I turned to see my best friend Lily standing in the doorway. "Emma, your dad called me. He was worried things might get out of hand." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Lily had always been my rock, and right now, I needed her more than ever. "I think we all need to take a step back," Lily continued, her calm voice a balm to my frayed nerves. "This is supposed to be a happy time, not a battlefield." Vivian huffed. "And who might you be?" "I'm the maid of honor," Lily replied coolly. "And I'm here to remind everyone that this day is about Emma and Lucas, not anyone else's expectations." As Lily's words sank in, I felt a sudden clarity. This wasn't just about the dress or the venue. It was about standing up for myself and the life Lucas and I wanted to build together. I turned to Vivian, my voice steady. "Mrs. Prescott, I love your son, but I won't let you or anyone else dictate how we celebrate that love. If you can't accept that, then maybe we shouldn't have a big wedding at all." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock on everyone's faces, feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. As I stood there, surrounded by discarded dresses and stunned faces, I realized I'd reached a turning point. The next move I made would define not just our wedding, but the entire future of my relationship with Lucas and his family. The choice loomed before me, as daunting as walking down the aisle itself. But this time, I was ready to face it head-on. I stood in the lavish dining room of the Prescott mansion, my hands shaking as I faced Lucas's parents. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lucas stood beside me, his jaw clenched, ready for another confrontation. "I think we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard Prescott leaned back in his chair, eyeing me with disdain. "About what exactly?" "How you're tearing this family apart." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, about how you've been treating us since the moment Lucas and I got engaged. Vivian scoffed. Treating you? We've given you everything, a beautiful venue, a designer dress. None of which we asked for, I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. You've steamrolled over every decision we've made, criticized every choice, and for what? To prove I'm not good enough for your son? Richard stood up, his face flushed with anger. Now listen here, young lady. You have no idea what it means to be a part of this family. The responsibilities, the expectations. And you have no idea who I am. I shot back, my voice rising. You've never bothered to get to know me, to understand what I bring to this relationship. Lucas stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Mom, Dad, Emma's right. You've been unfair to her from the start. Richard's eyes narrowed. Unfair? We're trying to protect you, son. This girl, he gestured dismissively at me, she's not of our world. She can't possibly understand or contribute to the life you're meant to lead. Something inside me snapped. The weeks of criticism, the constant belittling, it all came to a head in that moment. You want to know what I can contribute? Fine, let me enlighten you. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying over the screen. You remember my friend Audrey? The one you dismissed as probably being some wannabe actress? I held up the phone, showing them a photo of me with a stunningly beautiful woman on a red carpet. Their eyes widened in recognition. That's Audrey Lawrence, Vivian stammered. The Oscar-winning actress? I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over me. My best friend since childhood. And you see this man here? I swiped to another photo, this one of me with an older, distinguished-looking gentleman. That's Congressman Richard Thompson, Audrey's father and my godfather. The room fell silent. Lucas stared at me, shock evident on his face. I'd never told him about my connections, never wanting to be valued for who I knew rather than who I was. Richard sank back into his chair, his face pale. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said, my voice cold. You never bothered to ask. You were too busy assuming I was some gold digger after your son's money. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, my God, we've made a terrible mistake. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I blinked them back. Yes, you have, but not because of who my friends are. Your mistake was in judging me without ever giving me a chance. Lucas took my hand, squeezing it gently. Emma, why didn't you tell me? I turned to him, my heart aching. Because I wanted you to love me, not for my connections, and I wanted your parents to accept me for who I am, not who I know. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Richard and Vivian exchanged glances, their faces a mix of shock and shame. As I stood there, surrounded by the opulence of the Prescott home, I realized we'd reached a crossroads. The truth was out. The power dynamic shifted. But would it be enough to heal the rift between us, or had too much damage already been done? The choice loomed before us all, as daunting as the future we'd once envisioned together. And as I looked at Lucas, seeing the conflict in his eyes, I wondered if our love could survive this final test. The silence in the Prescott mansion was deafening. I stood there, my revelation hanging in the air like a thick fog. Lucas's parents, Richard and Vivian, stared at me with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Richard was the first to break the silence. Emma, we had no idea. I felt a surge of anger. Of course you didn't. You were too busy judging me to actually get to know me. Vivian stepped forward, her face pale. We've made a terrible mistake. Please, let us make it right. Before I could respond, Lucas spoke up. Make it right? How, Mom? You've spent months tearing Emma down, and now you want to just, what? Pretend it never happened? I squeezed Lucas's hand, grateful for his support. But the tension in the room was palpable, and I knew we were balancing on a knife's edge. Suddenly, Richard stood up and left the room without a word. We all exchanged confused glances, the silence growing more uncomfortable by the second. When he returned, he was carrying a checkbook. Emma, Lucas, please accept this as a token of our apology and our blessing for your wedding. He scribbled something and held out a check. My jaw dropped when I saw the amount. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Mr. Prescott, we can't accept this, I stammered. Lucas nodded in agreement. Dad, throwing money at the problem isn't going to fix anything. Richard's face fell. But we want to help. We want to give you the wedding you deserve. I felt a surge of frustration. The wedding we deserve? You mean the wedding you think we should have. This isn't about the money, Mr. Prescott. It's about respect. It's about accepting us and our choices. Vivian stepped in, her voice pleading. We do respect you, Emma. We see that now. Please, let us make amends. I looked at Lucas, seeing the conflict in his eyes. I knew he wanted peace with his parents, but at what cost? I think, I said slowly, that we need some time to think about this. Lucas nodded, relief evident on his face. Emma's right. This is a lot to process. As we turned to leave, Richard called out, Wait, there's something else. We paused, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. What now? Richard took a deep breath. We've already started making arrangements for the wedding at the Grand Plaza. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? After everything we've said, you still went behind our backs? Vivian jumped in, her voice frantic. We thought you'd come around. We wanted to surprise you with the perfect wedding. Lucas exploded. The perfect wedding? This isn't about what you want. It's our wedding, our life. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. All the progress we'd made, all the honesty. And we were right back where we started. I can't do this, I whispered, my voice breaking. I can't keep fighting this battle. Lucas turned to me, his face etched with concern. Emma, I shook my head, stepping back. I need some air. I need to think. As I rushed out of the mansion, I could hear Lucas calling after me, his parents' voices joining in a cacophony of apologies and explanations. But I couldn't face any of them right now. Standing on the manicured lawn, I felt lost. The wedding we'd dreamed of seemed further away than ever. And now, with this grand gesture from Lucas's parents, I felt more conflicted than ever. Did I fight for our original vision? Did I accept their apology and the lavish wedding they wanted to give us? Or did I walk away from it all? As the sun set over the Prescott estate, I realized I was at a crossroads. The choice I made now would define not just our wedding, but the entire future of my relationship with Lucas and his family. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, as heavy as the engagement ring on my finger. And for the first time since Lucas proposed, I wondered if I was making the right choice at all. I stood before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite of the Grand Plaza, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. The dress was exquisite, the hair and makeup flawless. Everything was perfect, just as Lucas's parents had wanted. But as I gazed at my reflection, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. A soft knock at the door broke my reverie. Emma, it's time, my mother's gentle voice called. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. My parents stood there, beaming with pride. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of Audrey and Congressman Richard, their presence a reminder of the tumultuous journey that had led us here. As we made our way to the grand ballroom, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The lavish decorations, the string quartet, the sea of unfamiliar faces, it was all so far from the intimate ceremony Lucas and I had originally envisioned. At the entrance, I paused, my heart racing. Through the crowd, I spotted Lucas at the altar, looking dashing in his tuxedo. Our eyes met, and for a moment the world fell away. This was it. This was our moment. But as I took my first step down the aisle, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see Vivian, Lucas's mother, her eyes brimming with tears. Emma, wait, she whispered, urgently. We need to talk to you and Lucas. Now. Confused and slightly annoyed, I allowed her to lead me to a small antechamber off the main hall. Lucas joined us, concern etched on his face. Richard stood there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. What's going on? Lucas demanded. The ceremony is about to start. Richard cleared his throat. Son, Emma, we owe you both an apology. A real one this time. Vivian nodded, her voice thick with emotion. We've been so caught up in our own expectations that we lost sight of what truly matters, your happiness. I felt a glimmer of hope. What are you saying? Richard took a deep breath. We're saying that if you want to call this off, the big wedding, the lavish reception, we'll understand. More than that, we'll support you. Lucas and I exchanged stunned glances. After all the conflict, all the compromises, were they really offering us a way out? But what about the guests? The expense? I asked, my mind reeling. Vivian smiled softly. None of that matters if it's not what you truly want. We've learned that the hard way. In that moment, looking at Lucas, I knew what we had to do. We'd lost sight of what was truly important, but it wasn't too late to reclaim it. Hand in hand, we walked back into the ballroom. The music swelled, and all eyes turned to us. But instead of proceeding down the aisle, we stopped. Lucas cleared his throat. Friends, family, we can't thank you enough for being here today, but Emma and I have realized something important. I squeezed his hand, finding my voice. We've been so caught up in planning the perfect wedding that we forgot what really matters, our love and our commitment to each other. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw confusion on some faces, understanding on others. So, Lucas continued, if you'll indulge us, we'd like to do things a little differently. What followed was unlike any wedding I could have imagined. We exchanged vows right there, in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by a circle of our closest family and friends. The rest of the guests became witnesses to a moment of pure, unscripted love. As we sealed our vows with a kiss, I caught sight of Lucas's parents. They were beaming, tears streaming down their faces. In that moment, I knew that the rift that had divided us was finally beginning to heal. The reception that followed was a joyous blend of elegance and intimacy. As Lucas and I moved among our guests, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Later, as we shared our first dance, Lucas whispered, "Are you happy, Mrs. Prescott?" I looked into his eyes, seeing our future reflected there, more than I ever thought possible. As we twirled under the sparkling chandeliers, I realized that sometimes the perfect ending isn't about having everything go according to plan. It's about finding beauty in the imperfections, strength in the struggles, and love in the most unexpected places. Our journey had been far from smooth, but standing there in Lucas's arms, surrounded by the people we loved, I knew that every twist and turn had led us exactly where we were meant to be. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Mark, my husband of 30 years, sat across from me, his eyes glued to the TV, ignoring my presence as usual. I sat there, lost in my thoughts, feeling the weight of years of unspoken grievances and suppressed anger. I had reached my limit. "Did you finish moving?" Mark's voice, tinged with his usual condescension, pierced the silence. I didn't look at him as I replied, "I'm leaving, Mark." My voice was calm, but inside a storm was raging. Mark scoffed, "Oh, really? And where will you go, Anna? You can't survive without me." His words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. For too long I had endured his dismissive attitude and his mother's incessant meddling. It was time to reclaim my life. "I'll manage," I said, standing up. I felt empowered despite the fear and uncertainty that lay ahead. His mother, who had been living with us for the past year, walked in, her eyes narrowing as she saw my packed bags. "Running away, are we?" she sneered. "I knew you didn't have the spine to handle this family." Ignoring her, I grabbed my bags and headed towards the door. Mark didn't move to stop me. Instead, he called out, "You'll be back. You need us." As I stepped out of the house, I felt a sense of liberation. The cool evening breeze felt like a balm to my suffocated soul. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. For 30 years, I had played the dutiful wife to Mark, a man who saw me more as a convenience than a partner. Our son Alex was the only light in my life, but even he couldn't fill the growing void in my heart. Mark's mother, with her constant criticisms and manipulations, only added to the toxicity of our home. I found a small apartment, modest but peaceful. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and think without judgment. In the following days, I ignored the barrage of calls and messages from Mark and his mother. They fluctuated between pleading and threats, but I was done listening. My coworkers at the library, where I had worked part-time for years, were supportive. They had seen the changes in me, the gradual loss of my spirit. Now, they witnessed my rebirth. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, my phone rang. It was Alex. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was laced with concern. "I am, Alex. Better than I've been in years," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Dad and Grandma, they're not taking it well. Dad's been drinking, and Grandma won't stop talking about how you've abandoned them." A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it away. "They'll manage, Alex. They need to learn to respect others." Alex was silent for a moment. "I'm glad you're finally thinking about yourself, Mom. Let me know if you need anything." As I hung up the phone, I realized this was just the beginning. Mark and his mother had underestimated me for years. It was time to show them that I was no longer the woman they thought they could control. My journey of self-discovery and revenge had just begun. In my small apartment, surrounded by the few belongings I had taken with me, I reflected on the past 30 years with Mark. Our marriage, once filled with promise, had slowly disintegrated into a shadow of what it could have been. It all started blissfully. Mark was charming and attentive, and we were young, full of dreams. But as the years passed, the charm faded, revealing a man more interested in his own needs than those of his family. When Alex was born, I thought it would bring us closer, but it only highlighted our differences. Mark's idea of parenting was providing financially, leaving the emotional nurturing to me. His mother, Eleanor, always hovered in the background, her criticism of my parenting a constant drone. "Anna, you're coddling the boy too much," Eleanor would say. "Mark never needed all this fuss." I endured her jibes, focusing on Alex, who grew up to be a thoughtful and independent young man, despite the tension at home. The turning point came when Eleanor moved in with us. Mark didn't even discuss it with me. I just came home one day to find her bags in the hallway. "My house is too lonely," she had said, a manipulative glint in her eye. Living with Eleanor was suffocating. She criticized everything from my cooking to the way I dressed. "Mark could have done so much better," she would often say within my earshot. But what truly broke me was discovering Mark's betrayal. I stumbled upon bank statements one day, revealing large withdrawals from our joint account, money used to fund Eleanor's gambling habit and Mark's secret indulgences. Confronting them led to heated arguments, with Mark always siding with his mother. "She's my mother, Anna. She needs this to cope with her loneliness," he would argue, dismissive of my concerns. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between them, plotting to take control of the finances completely, reducing me to nothing but an occupant in their house. I knew then that I couldn't live in that shadow any longer. The day I left, I promised myself that they would one day understand the pain they had caused. My plan was simple yet effective. I would hit them where it hurt the most, their pride and their finances. I started by legally separating our finances, a move that shocked Mark. "What do you think you're doing?" he had yelled over the phone. "Protecting myself, something I should have done years ago," I replied, my voice calm but firm. Eleanor's reaction was even more dramatic. "You ungrateful wretch! After everything we've done for you," she screeched when she found out. But I was unmoved. The years of submission were over. I was playing by my own rules now, and this was just the beginning of their karma. The weeks following my financial independence were tumultuous. Mark and Eleanor were furious, their true natures fully exposed in their anger. I received countless calls, each more venomous than the last. "You think you're clever, Anna?" Mark hissed during one call. "You're nothing without me. You'll come crawling back." "I won't, Mark. I'm done being your puppet," I replied, my newfound strength bolstering my words. Eleanor was even more vitriolic. "You'll regret this, Anna. You've ruined our family." "There was no family to ruin, Eleanor. It was an illusion," I shot back. Despite their threats, I felt liberated. The fear that once controlled me had evaporated, replaced by a resolute desire for justice. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I started by reaching out to old friends and acquaintances, sharing my story. The truth about Mark and Eleanor's manipulations and financial deceit quickly spread, tarnishing their reputations. Mark, who prided himself on his social standing, was appalled. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded during a rare face-to-face encounter. "You did this to yourself," I replied calmly. "I'm just shedding light on it." Eleanor, faced with the community's judgment, was equally distraught. "You've turned everyone against us. This is war, Anna." But I was no longer intimidated by her. "No, Eleanor, this is justice." I watched as their world crumbled. Mark's friends began to distance themselves, wary of his tarnished image. Eleanor's social circle, once a source of her pride, dwindled as the truth about her gambling and manipulation spread. But I didn't stop there. I knew their financial instability was their weakest point. With the help of a lawyer, I began the process of claiming my share of our joint assets, ensuring that Eleanor's gambling debts were exposed and Mark's mismanagement of our finances was brought to light. The court proceedings were grueling, but I stood my ground. Mark and Eleanor's attempts to discredit me fell flat, their lies and deceit no match for the truth. As the judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant portion of our assets, I saw the defeat in Mark and Eleanor's eyes. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. "You've destroyed us, Anna," Mark said, a shadow of his former arrogant self. "No, Mark. You destroyed us long ago. I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I looked forward to the future, free from the chains of my past. Mark and Eleanor's downfall was the first step in my journey of reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the court ruling was a whirlwind. With my rightful share of the assets, I began building a life free from Mark and Eleanor's shadow. Their reactions, however, were a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this to us, Anna," Mark exclaimed over the phone one evening, his voice laced with desperation. "I've done nothing but take back what's mine," I replied firmly. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me." Eleanor's response was more underhanded. She tried to rally family members against me, painting herself as a victim. But her attempts were futile. The truth about her had spread too far. "Anna, you're tearing this family apart," she accused during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "This family was broken long before I left," I countered, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I relished the freedom of living on my own terms. I changed my phone number, cutting off their direct line of harassment. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding solace in helping others who had faced similar struggles. But my quest for justice wasn't over. I learned that Eleanor was planning to contest the court's decision, still clinging to the hope of reclaiming the money for her gambling habits. "You won't get away with this, Anna. I'll make sure of it," she threatened in a message relayed through a relative. In response, I fortified my legal defenses, prepared to counter any move she made. I was no longer the woman who shied away from confrontation. I was a fighter, standing up for what was rightfully mine. Mark, meanwhile, was crumbling under the pressure. His once pristine image was now tarnished, and his career suffered as a result. The friends and connections he valued so much were now distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with a man caught in scandal. "You've ruined me, Anna," he lamented during a rare moment of reflection. "You ruined yourself, Mark. I just exposed the truth," I replied. As the weeks turned into months, I watched as their once secure world disintegrated. Eleanor's attempt to contest the court's decision failed miserably, leaving her financially and socially bankrupt. Mark's career continued its downward spiral, his reputation irreparably damaged. But despite their downfall, I felt no joy in their suffering. It was a necessary step in my journey, but it was not the end. I had reclaimed my independence and my dignity, but I was still healing from years of neglect and emotional abuse. As I continued to rebuild my life, I focused on finding peace and happiness within myself. I had emerged from the shadows of my past, stronger and more resilient. My story was not one of revenge, but of emancipation, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Several months had passed since the court's decision, and the ripples of my actions were still felt. Mark and Eleanor, now estranged from most of their acquaintances, were living a shadow of their former lives. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Alex. He looked troubled, his usually bright eyes clouded with concern. "Mom, I just came from seeing Dad and Grandma," he began, his voice heavy. They're not doing well." I offered him a seat and a warm cup of tea. "Tell me what happened, Alex." He sighed deeply before continuing. "Dad's been let go from his job, his drinking, it's gotten worse. And Grandma, she's lost everything to gambling. They're selling the house." I listened, my heart aching for Alex. Despite everything, they were still his family. "Mom, did we go too far?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, we stood up for what's right. They made their choices," I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. The news of their misfortune didn't bring me joy. Instead, it was a somber reminder of the consequences of a life lived without integrity and respect for others. The following weeks were filled with whispers and rumors. Mark and Eleanor's house, once a symbol of their success, was now on the market. Their fall from grace was complete. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Mark had tried to find work, but his reputation preceded him. Eleanor, meanwhile, had become a pariah in her social circles. her gambling addiction now public knowledge. One evening, while I was out for a walk, I saw Mark. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his posture slumped, his eyes hollow. Our paths crossed, and for a moment we stood there in silence. "Anna, he began, his voice cracking. "There's nothing to say, Mark," I interrupted. "You chose your path." He nodded slowly, a resigned look in his eyes. "I never thought it would come to this," he murmured. As I walked away, leaving Mark behind, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had once held so much power over me was now just a stranger with a broken past. Eleanor, too, faded into obscurity. Her once lively demeanor was now subdued, the realities of her actions finally catching up to her. As the chapter of Mark and Eleanor closed, I realized that my journey was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and finding peace. I had stood up to my oppressors, not for vengeance, but for justice and self-respect. The experience had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I continued to build my new life, I did so with a newfound strength and a heart ready to embrace the future. Months turned into a year since the upheaval of my life began. In this time, my journey of self-reinvention continued, with each day bringing new strengths and realizations. The downfall of Mark and Eleanor was not my endgame. It was merely a byproduct of my pursuit for justice and respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat in my cozy living room, the warm sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting on the changes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Alex. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something," Alex said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Sarah and I are getting married, and we'd love for you to help us with the planning." Joy surged through me. "That's wonderful news, Alex. Of course, I'd love to help." Our conversation was filled with laughter and plans for the future, a stark contrast to the calls filled with distress and despair from the past. A few days later, while out for my regular walk, I encountered Eleanor. She seemed smaller, diminished somehow. Our eyes met, and there was a brief flicker of something, regret perhaps, or realization in hers. "Anna," she began, her voice quivering. I'm sorry." The apology, unexpected and late, caught me off guard. "Eleanor, your actions brought you here. I hope you find some peace." As I walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone, I realized the full extent of my transformation. I no longer harbored anger or resentment. I had moved beyond the need for revenge. The wedding planning with Alex and Sarah was a joyful affair. It was during these moments, surrounded by love and hope, that I truly appreciated the beauty of moving forward. The day of the wedding arrived, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter and tears of joy. Watching Alex and Sarah, so full of love and promise, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges, we had emerged stronger. In my toast, I said, "Life brings many challenges, but it's how we face them that defines us." Today, we celebrate love, resilience, and new beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the happy faces, feeling content. I had not only survived, I had thrived. In the years that followed, Mark and Eleanor remained distant memories. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved away, each carrying their own burdens. My life, once overshadowed by their presence, was now my own. I found fulfillment in my work, joy in my role as a mother and friend, and peace in my solitary moments. As I sat in my garden one sunny afternoon watching the flowers bloom, I realized this was what true freedom felt like. My journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but it led me to a place of contentment and strength. The end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own life, and in this new chapter I found happiness, peace, and a sense of self that no one could ever take away.